So thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We really appreciate you putting the time aside to spend with us. Today, we at Interactive Services, myself, Matt Plass, Chief Learning Officer with the company, and Dan Brown, Strategic Learning Director, are lucky enough to be joined by Rachel Donnelly, who's the Senior Instructional Designer at KFC. And today we're going to look at a program that we, again, were lucky enough to work with Rachel and KFC on, which was around service mastery for their hourly employees. It was an award-winning program, about which more later. And one of the reasons it was award-winning is that we were able to show success metrics for the program. And one of the reasons we were able to show success metrics for the program was because the program was very performance-based rather than knowledge-based, and also because it included some gamification elements that lifted the whole experience for the employee away from being a traditional training course and into something much more fun and dynamic and engaging. It's the kind of program that everyone loves to work on. It's the kind of program that employees love to take, and it's the kind of program that, as we've seen, does very well in the awards as well. So today's webinar is really focused around how you build a business case internally for that kind of program. If it's something that you'd like to do, we're going to round up all the, as we walk through how we put the program together, at the end we'll round up all the elements of that into what we consider to be the road towards building a business case. As we go through, I'm going to ask Rachel and Dan to chime in and give some commentary and colour to the various points along the journey. It was a very interesting journey for us, and it's a program that we are particularly proud of. So, service mastery, I'm sure everyone on this call has been into a KFC. You can imagine immediately how important the customer service is to the business. And the first question I'm going to ask, and actually Dan, maybe you could help me out here, is what do we think good service looks like? Not just from the KFC perspective, but in a broader sense.
Thanks, Matt. Let's start with a cliche here, but I think expectations are higher than ever when it comes to customer service. We are noticing with a lot of our clients now that we are referring to their customers not as customers but as guests. I think we're all aware of some of the issues that we're having to overcome as businesses just now, which is increasingly folks are staying at home, they're ordering online, they're using drive-through, so you have to give them a reason to go into your restaurant, your store, or your outlet. They want to be given consistent service. They want to be served by folks who have a depth of product knowledge, and they want to make connections. We don't want to be served by robots who have been taught what to say and how to say it. We want to be making inspired connections with the folks who are giving us our service. Rachel, Matt, if there's anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you were spot on, Dan. I mean, I think it's about the overall experience that you receive.
Yes, it is, and packaging that experience and making something that each employee can personalize and make their own is quite challenging, and that was really one of the challenges that we faced on this program. So thank you, guys. So let's move on. I want to have a look very quickly at the journey we're going to take over the next 30 minutes. Remember, this is about building a business case. We are going to show you the program, which is fantastic looking, and I think you'll really like it. But it's really about how do you get there and how do you build that business case. So first of all, we're going to have a look at the opportunity for KFC. We're going to look at some of the barriers that they and we faced in order to realize that opportunity. We're going to touch on what it means to focus on performance, not knowledge, because that was a key part of being able to get the funding for the program, and it's certainly a key part of it becoming an award-winning program. We're going to talk about the design piece, which is around how you layer learning onto your hourly employees, and also how you use gamification as a way of allowing them to demonstrate their mastery. And finally, we'll come back to the results and that business case piece as well. So I think the first thing we need to understand is what do we mean by mastery? The program was called Service Mastery, and for us, mastery is about performance. It's about what you do rather than what you know. And Dan, maybe you could give us a little color on this, because it's very much at Interactive Services. It's our house style. It's how we go about the business of training and development.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So there's a couple of questions that we often start by asking our clients at the beginning of big initiatives as we work out how to build up a curriculum. So number one is this interesting or is it essential? we find as we look at clients' curriculums that there's often a lot of information in there that's been crammed in that's interesting to know, but actually it isn't impacting the business or isn't impacting your ability to perform your role. So is it interesting, is it essential, and is this something, as Matt says, that you need to know, or is it something that you need to be able to do? If it's something that you need to be able to do and do regularly and do well, then that often initiates a conversation around perhaps this might work as a sim. As a side note, I was touring a distribution center a couple of days ago, and we were looking at a number of job roles, and I was really struck by the number of tasks that just required repetition, that they took a number of hours or days or weeks of repetition of the same tasks, often performed under various types of duress to build up the skill required to do the job. I was kind of reminded of the Karate Kid, where Ralph Macchio is asked by Mr. Miyagi to perform the same move again and again and again and again. But I think, with simulations, often I think where you can get your operators on side when you're talking about simulations is to really kind of impress upon them that this is about giving your employees an opportunity to build up skill performing important tasks under various types of duress before they go out into the real world. And simulations don't solve all the problems in the wheelhouse, but they certainly give your employees a great head start when it comes to building up skill and going on the journey to becoming masters.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I agree completely. I think it's about, and we do this in as many programs as we can, giving people a safe space to succeed but also to fail before they go back out into the real world. So they have as much as possible the experience of what it means to do this as well as it can be done, but also what happens if you don't do it in the optimal way. It can be just as useful in terms of learning. But I'm going to turn over to Rachel now. So as we move on to look at the opportunity for KFC, so at the very beginning of this program, what was on the table for KFC if they got this right? Rachel, maybe you could just talk us through the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And really for KFC, we knew that this was more than just another training experience or another opportunity to create training. This was really about a business opportunity. And so we know that our guests, the experience our guests receive in our restaurant, it really equals our brand reputation. We have a favorite quote that we have on the screen here that says, that people will forget what you've said and they may forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And so really all that means to us is that what our guests experience when they come into our restaurants, it makes a really big difference. And that does translate into our brand reputation, which then translates into business performance. And so when we did our initial analysis on this project, we did find directly from our guests that at times we could be inconsistent. There were some times of discourteousness or rudeness and unprofessionalism. And so we knew that we really had a big opportunity here to create a consistent, welcoming, and friendly experience.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Neil, just jump back very quickly, pardon me. Because I just wanted to pick up on that, Rachel, because I think we've talked about this being performance-based, and we've talked about that being a key in order to get the funding to do this program. And I think as soon as you realize that what we're talking about is the customer experience, we're not talking about a training program that will deliver knowledge. We're talking about behavioral outcomes that are going to lead to an enhanced brand. Suddenly, you find the businesses sitting up and taking notice of what it is that you're trying to do. It becomes a very different conversation. But I do want to move on to the barriers. So obviously this is very aspirational. Who wouldn't want their staff to be consistent, welcoming, friendly, and authentic? But you have multiple, locations and sites and all sorts of barriers that you face there. So maybe just walk us through what you identified as the key rocks that you were going to have to move to make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all familiar in the training space with every program having some barriers, some considerations that you need to take into account when you develop it. And so here we're showing just a few that some of our most important ones that we've faced. Mentioned before that some of our restaurants have had very inconsistent service levels in the past. We found that out through our needs analysis. And you could go into 2 different restaurants across the country receive a very different service experience. And actually, we also found that on occasion, you could go into the same restaurant multiple times and get a very different experience. So that was definitely something that we knew we needed to address and consider as part of this program. We also have 4,500 plus locations across the country, and so consistency of delivery was a really important consideration. Our managers in the restaurants are excellent at what they do, running a restaurant, but they are not necessarily excellent at training. That's not necessarily their first and foremost skill. And so we know we needed to create a scalable solution that would allow a consistent delivery of this behavior change across all of the restaurants in the country. We also have a predominantly hourly workforce, as you know, most QSR industry does, and so time to training is a real factor. Our managers really need people to learn what they need to learn as quickly as possible so they can get back on the floor and deliver that to our guests. So we needed to make sure that our final solution was very efficient as well as effective. And then finally, our team members really needed to be engaged with the content and with this movement. So we talked about before how this was not just another training program, this was really a business need that we had. And so this was really a movement to kind of, you know, redirect and shift what our guests are seeing in the restaurant into measurable business results. And so we really needed whatever we produced to engage the hearts and the minds as well as create behavior change.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that, Rachel, I think, you know, another one of the barriers, I think, where I just want to give you a kudos here is that we at Interactive Services, we have about 70 or 80 Fortune 200 clients, and we still find that a large number of our talent development partners often don't know how to communicate or talk to or engage, you know, the operators or other folks in the business. And I think what you did really well was you were very clear as to how this curriculum was going to support the business goal. You were very focused on the behaviors that were going to drive business results. And then, you know, we were very clear as to how we were going to prove the curriculum was on track and impacting the business. And, you know, I think that often we find with our partners there's a lot of money is spent on big curriculums, and they just don't take root in the business because senior leaders or operators aren't clear on how this is going to help them. I think what you do at KFC consistently well is make the business case and make sure folks are very clear as to how this is going to drive performance in the business.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I will say that, yeah, our very first meeting that we had about this project, when we knew we were going to start working on it, the very first thing we talked about is what is the results we would expect to see at the end of this in a measurable business way. And so, yeah, that did make a big difference in all the conversations going forward.
Yeah. And actually, I think that takes us on to the next point we want to make, which is sometimes these things can feel slightly overwhelming, and I think programs of this nature are most successful when you manage to simplify what it is you're looking for in terms of outcomes. And I know that one of the things you did, Rachel, with KFC was trying to boil down the behaviors you're looking for into these 6 areas. So it might be worth just running through these for us. So give us a sense of the kind of outcomes that we were looking for as part of the program.
Yeah, and so once we knew what the measurable business result was going to be, then we could boil it down, as you said, Matt, to what are the high-level performance that we would need our team to do in order to accomplish that. And so at a very high level, you know, that's focusing on friendly and fast service. So not only do we want to get you through the drive-through in and out the door as quickly as possible, but it needs to be still a friendly experience. It also needs to be accurate, so we know that guests aren't necessarily happy when they don't get what they order. I know I'm not. Also, please and thank you is simple courtesy. So make sure we're saying, you know, please when we ask for a change or a credit card. Make sure we're saying thank you at the end of the transaction to kind of round out that guest experience. And that goes along with smiles and eye contact, so that we're making a personal connection with each guest. Engaged teams is really about that holistic approach of, you know, they understand what we're trying to accomplish as a business. This isn't just another message coming from the corporate headquarters. This is something that they personally believe and care about and something they want to get behind. And then treat every guest like a friend in your home was kind of our overarching vision. You know, at the end of the day, at the end of the experience, did that guest feel like they were a friend in our home?
Yeah, fantastic. And I think by doing that, I mean, the great thing about this is not only is it something that the design team who are building the program can kind of focus on. It's also something that the learner can focus on as well. So by grouping the information under these kind of headings and the behaviors under these headings, it becomes something that everyone can instantly recognize and understand, which is, I think, quite a powerful way to do it. So I suppose the next stage for us, as we look at this journey through, was to take those ideas around the behaviors that would make a difference and start to think about the tools that we had in the toolkit that we'd be able to use in the program to start delivering on those behaviors, telling people what they needed to know, but more importantly, showing them what they needed to do and allowing them to practice that, and then somehow confirming that the information that we'd given them and the new behaviors that we taught them were going to be activated on the work floor. So Dan, maybe you just talk us through, as we started moving into the program design, what we felt were the key tools in the toolkit.
Yeah, I think the first call out here is that we make no claims here that we revolutionized training or that we reinvented training. We put together a smart blend of short, punchy learning nuggets. So we used videos and animations as kind of short, punchy explainers that would summarize key working procedures and ideas. Online modules that, again, were often 3, 5, 8, 10 minutes long to introduce key concepts and prepare you to be given the opportunity to practice in your simulation. We made the missions, they were really activities that transferred the online knowledge into the restaurant, and we used a lot of gamification in terms of you had to build up enough points to be able to be sent on your mission in the restaurant. You had to show your manager that you were able to perform or complete the task so that they would give you the code to then allow you to move up to your next level. And the manager manual was quite light touch, but it was an important piece of the curriculum in as much as we were very focused on the why. You know, why is this important to the learner? How do we inspire the learner and infuse what they're doing with meaning and purpose? So the managers were there, obviously, to support as they performed key tasks, but often to give the really important piece of the why.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, thanks, Dan. And one of the things, if we move on to the next slide, sort of the next stage of that is thinking about how these tools that we're used to seeing in the blend, how they play into each other and where they're really useful. And this is actually a mapping exercise we do often with our clients. And there's no right answer to it, but in the context of each program, we look at, well, you know, we've got video and animation, we've got online modules, we've got simulations. What are we trying to do with each of these? So something like an animation or a video is fantastic for spreading a general awareness, for making sure that everyone is aligned to the overall vision of what good looks like. An online module is very good at taking that awareness, but actually, rather than putting it out in a general way, starting to get role specific and starting to look at specific examples and starting to create experts in that area. And then as we move over to the right-hand side, we've got our simulations and our offline activities, you know, in-store activities, and that's where you really start to see expert behavior coming through, because people are starting to do rather than just know. And then down in the bottom right, we've got this sort of general behavior, the manager's manual, which allows a manager to calibrate across the entire crew that they're working with and make sure that as soon as those behaviors start to be exhibited in the right way, they're rewarded, and if they're not exhibited in the right way, that they can be, you know, they can be tweaked, and so everyone's moving in the right direction. So a big part of this was about looking at how those tools would be used to make the most of them, but also it was a big program. So I think, Rachel, the next thing I was going to ask you to walk us through was this concept of layering the learning, so that we didn't overwhelm people who were coming into this role for the first time.
Yeah, and so what we're seeing on the screen is exactly that. It's how we organized the tools and how they worked together to create that behavior change, that performance change that we were talking about. And really the other benefit of kind of layering learning was we maximized efficiency and effectiveness, kind of remembering back to, you know, training time is at a premium. And so for each topic that was in our curriculum, we had 3 parts to it, so we broke it down. And what we've done is we've started with kind of basic knowledge, and we've moved continuously on and up into harder and harder practice and more realistic practice. So for each topic, we have a 10 to 15 minute e-learning course. I think there's a few that are under 10 minutes. And that does provide kind of the basic knowledge about the topic or the behavior or the performance that the team member is going to need to do, and, you know, all the information around that. Immediately after they finish the e-learning course, they move into a 5-minute or less simulation. And this allows them to, in an electronic format, practice in a safe environment the behavior that they just learned. So I don't want someone brand new practicing on a guest. I'd prefer that they'd practice in a safe environment first. So when they get to the guest, they're pretty polished and they're ready to go, and that guest gets a great experience. And so the simulation became a natural next step to allow them to practice that behavior in a safe environment. Once they're done with that, as Dan mentioned, then they move on to an on-the-job activity, or what we've called a mission manual. And that allows them to transfer what they've just practiced into a real-world environment. And so they can perform that behavior with their manager or with another experienced team member and really get a feel for how that is in the real world. That process then repeats for every single topic in the entire curriculum. So we're building, behavior change and mastery as we go, little by little, in each topic. Once they're done with all of the topics, they then enter the capstone game, and that is our mastery check. And so we essentially combine all of the behaviors, skills, performance that we've asked them to learn throughout the curriculum, and they need to practice it in a multi-level game, no longer in isolation. So they're no longer practicing just one behavior at a time. They're now practicing them all as they would in the real world. Things happen, come at them like they would in the real world. So they're needing to switch, between the behaviors they've learned and know when they need to do things and when they need to switch to something else.
Yeah. That's fantastic, thank you. And I'm just going to jump in and say that, we promised that this would be about building a business case. And obviously, for anyone who's on this webinar, your curriculum will look very different, I'm sure, because you'll have a different audience and different outcomes you're looking for. But what we've touched on so far, just in the last 25 minutes, is that we were able to prove all the way through this process that we were very outcome focused, that we knew what the business needed, and everything we were designing would be based around the behaviors that we wanted to see. We could prove that all the money that we wanted to spend was going in the right place. So we weren't suggesting e-learning for e-learning's sake or simulations for simulation's sake. There was a methodology behind our choices of modality, so the budget made perfect sense in terms of the outcomes that we were looking for. And then finally, it involves a lot of real work. So we were able to say to the business, we can almost guarantee this is going to work and is going to deliver on the outcomes, because as part of the training, people are actually doing the thing we want them to do. So by the time they get to that capstone game, by the time they're able to prove their mastery, we know they're going to pass the driving test because we've seen them driving for the last few weeks. So in terms of building a business case, while your curriculum will look very different, those three key points I think are very important. It's outcome focused. The modalities you're suggesting, you can actually speak to exactly why you've picked them and why you know they're going to work. And then finally, that your program somehow includes that real element that guarantees success. Let's take a quick snapshot just of what the program looked like. And Rachel, maybe, obviously it would be relevant to greater and lesser extents to the people on the webinar, but it's interesting just to see what that actually looks like in terms of a curriculum. So maybe just give us a quick walkthrough here.
Yeah, what the screenshot that we're seeing is actually what the learner sees when they go to take the curriculum. So we've organized it in a way that it was very user-friendly and easy to know what order to take things and what topic to take next. Because as Matt was just mentioning, we were very deliberate in how we set this up so that it was very, every component that we had in the curriculum had a specific purpose. And part of that was that they needed to take it in a specific order so that they could build skill, one at a time. And so we're not throwing everything in the kitchen sink at them at once. We're layering the learning, and they're learning a little bit and practicing, then learning a little bit more advanced and then practicing. And so you can see that in this curriculum map. For example, we go from order taking basics to order taking advanced into the drive-through without any repeat of any knowledge, but we build upon what was before it.
Yeah, fantastic. And the feedback we've had so far has been phenomenal about how well this has worked. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, that as Rachel and the team identified the 6 sort of areas of behavior that would really make the difference, they became visible icons that the learner could use as a hook. And same thing with the program. As the learner looks at this program, and we're looking at the sort of learner's view of the program, it doesn't look scary to them. It looks like an achievable sequence of activities that's going to lead to mastery, and that's something that increased their comfort and engagement as well. We've mentioned that the capstone event was a game. That's the piece we're actually going to show you in a few moments, but I want to talk very quickly. I think most of the people on this call will be familiar with the concept of gamification. Just from the interactive services point of view, what do we mean by gamification? Well, I think the important thing is that it's a learning experience that feels like a game. It's not a game that encourages learning. And there's one very, very simple reason for that. A game that encourages learning could be a fantastic experience, but it could take 5 minutes, 50 minutes, 5 hours, 50 hours, as most games do. A learning experience is a very targeted experience, and it's all about the learning outcome. So although it might have game elements and be extraordinarily engaging and fun, if you need it to be 30 minutes, it will be a 30-minute experience. And you will not have the opportunity to do anything that doesn't lead into those core outcomes that we're driving towards. So for us, gamification is wonderful, but it's not an alternative to learning. It's a flavor of learning. And so if we look at what we actually mean by gamification, how does that translate? It means that if you consider your typical learning experience, whether it's online or whether it's in the classroom, we're pulling some of the elements from gamification that we know drive engagement. And that could be around the narrative and the storytelling. It could be about introducing pressures like putting the learner against the clock. It could be around introducing competition by allowing them to compete with each other, allowing them to collect resources or gain points. Most games introduce a personalized experience, so the learner feels they're moving their own piece through the game or themselves through the game, and they have visible progress and what we call energy bars, which I'm sure you've all seen in games. It's where the decisions I make and the actions I take have make a visible difference to what I see on the screen. So for example, I might have a little bar in the corner, and that goes up if I make good decisions and it goes down if I make bad decisions. So I'm getting that continual visual feedback on my performance as I go through. And the final piece, of course, is recognition, the pat on the back. It's something that the gaming world does so well. It's something that the learning world does less well, and we could learn a lot from gaming here. One of the greatest motivators is recognition, and the more we can recognize good behavior and good performance, the more engaged learners will be mid-program. So that's very important to us as well. So that's a snapshot of how we approach gamification. Dan, I think you're going to just touch on a few examples of how well it's worked.
Yeah, and Matt, I think I had my own gamification epiphany about 3 or 4 years ago when I sat in on a before and after of a gamification of an ILT. And for the before, we were working for a retailer who were bringing in senior merchants for a couple of days to do some merchant ILT. And the folks in the classroom were generally heads down answering emails whilst listening to the ILT. They were multitasking. They were popping out from the room to make the occasional panicked call or burn through some emails. And it just wasn't working as a learner experience. And the very simple switch that we flipped was to have the instructor at the beginning of the new version of the same ILT was to say to folks at the beginning, okay, we're going to split you up into 4 teams. We're going to give each team an imaginary $1 million. At the end of this 2 days of ILT, one of your teams is going to have $4 million. The other 3 teams are going to be bust. And, you know, maybe I'm exaggerating to make a point here, but instantly everybody puts their phones down, everybody closes the laptop. You see folks looking around the room, sizing each other up, trying to work out where the competition's coming from. And, you know, I think with gamification, the key thing for me is you have to make your learners sit forward and engage and want to do well. And I think that, you know, you can often do that in very simple, elegant ways that really don't take a lot of additional work. And I think increasingly organizations are clocking onto that. And, you know, I think for a long time there, it felt like with a lot of our clients, we were talking about mobile a lot, or we were hearing folks ask about HTML a lot, but they weren't ultimately deciding to go with it. But I think we're seeing that in the last 18 months, 2 years, that the folks really are jumping off the cliff now and really embracing gamification. And you can see here a number of screen grabs for a number of clients where we've delivered different gamification solutions. I think that they're a great way of engaging your operators, because when they can see that I get it, this is about performance, not about knowledge, they really embrace it and often become your champions within the organization. And as a side note, there's a couple of courses on here. I won't tell you which ones they are, but I took my 10-year-old daughter and one of her friends to Florida last year, and we got stuck inside for a couple of days while it was raining. And out of desperation to keep them entertained, we brought out a couple of these simulations, and they sat there and they played them again and again and again and again. And I have a 10-year-old daughter who can get a job at 2 or 3 of these organizations now because, goodness me, they sat there and were, keen to do better each time or to complete a task faster each time. So I think they're a great way of engaging your learners and really kind of changing the temperature or the emotional tone of your learning.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I agree 100%. And just to bring this back to the title of the webinar, which is about building that business case, gamification has been a buzzword for a while. If it does cost a little bit more money than traditional learning, and if you're going to go and ask for that money, you need to be very, very clear on why you need it. And I think Dan's example is a great one, because if gamification it's not just something that learning nerds like me like, it's something that will genuinely stop a business wasting money on training that is not engaging people. If you have an expensive class day full of people and half of them are on their phone the whole time, then that's a huge waste of money. But if by introducing a few gamification elements, you're able to pull everyone to the front and engage everybody, then that is a very, very good use of that additional budget, because it's not always cheap. But when it comes to building a business case, let's try and be as clear as we can be about what the effect that we think it's going to have and the benefit it's going to have. Right, time to have a look at the game itself. So I think, Neil, you're going to bring up the game, and then Rachel, I believe you're going to drive because you're very familiar with this now. And I'm going to be your guinea pig, I think.
Yeah. So while it's pulling up, I'll give you a little bit of background about what we're about to see. What we're about to demo is actually the 4th and final level of our capstone game. And so this is where learners prove that if a guest has a complaint or an issue, that they can solve it. And that was that was our last topic in the curriculum. You need all the behaviors you're going to learn before that to be able to handle these more what we're calling advanced situations. And so we'll kind of go through that, and we'll see how you do, Matt. Why don't we go ahead and before yeah, go ahead and hit start, and let's see what's going on.
Look at the chicken that's in my meal. It has no skin and it's really small. Do you really expect me to eat this?
Now you'll see that we've been presented with a guest that has a complaint that someone may have in a KFC restaurant. So these are complaints that we've pulled from actual guest logs, and we're presented with a variety of choices here. And I'll also point out that the choices that we made in this game, we made them deliberately similar. So if you're reading through them and you're scanning them and you're saying, I don't see much difference here, that's on purpose. When we went through and we developed all of these simulations in these games, we knew it would only be worth the money that we were spending and worth the time and effort to create this is if it actually created behavioral change. And it was only going to do that if they were realistic answers. If we had answers that were very obviously right and answers that were very obviously wrong, or one that was very long and so everybody picks the longest one, we were never going to have anybody learn anything, and we were never going to enact behavior change and hit our business goals. And so we spent a lot of time making sure that there was really subtle differences between the answer options and that people really had to stop and read them in detail and really think about them. I'll also just kind of point out some other things you see here. At the top, we do have our scoreboard, and so you can see, what our score is entering this round. We do have a timer in other rounds. This round, we deliberately left the timer off because we don't want anyone to feel rushed taking care of an upset guest. That's a time to slow down and really take your time and make sure that you're doing it right. But in other rounds, we did use time to simulate a sense of urgency as well. And so, Matt, what do you think about this guest? How do you think we should respond?
Right, well, I think that the correct answer is the one on the left, because I think that's an apology plus an offer to fix the problem. But I'm going to see what happens if you get it wrong. I think the one that would annoy this guest is the middle one, because I'm demanding to see the receipt before I talk about replacing the order. So Neil, can we go for the middle one? Let's see what happens.
Well, I don't have my receipt, but I know what I ordered. It was a 2-piece original meal with dark meat.
Well, yeah, he didn't seem very happy about that, Matt, but you still have some response you could give here. So what do you think that we should do?
Well, again, I'm drawn towards the answer on the left because I think at this stage it's the time for niceties has passed and we really just need to get this guy some chicken. But actually, I'm more interested to see how angry he becomes. So let's try the one on the right, Neil.
What, are you kidding me? I already told you I don't have it.
Yeah, he's definitely getting more angry, which is realistic. So that's what would happen in a KFC if you demanded to see a receipt and you know weren't believing the guest and weren't apologizing for things. So we're definitely seeing a realistic reaction from this guest. I'll also point out that we've now picked 2 answers that weren't great, and our score's gone down 25 points each. And so in this game, you know, instead of having a feedback box pop up like perhaps in a normal e-learning course, we're getting realistic, real-world feedback. So we're seeing our scores going down, but we're also seeing the feedback from the guests, and that's really telling us that, oh, we might be going down a bad path. So I don't know, Matt. I mean, we may have gone too far down the path, but we got 2 options here. What do you think we should do?
Let's see if we can salvage it. Neil, go for the one on the left, because I think if I mention that receipt again, he's going to throw that chicken at me.
What? I don't have time for that. Forget it.
Oh, looks like I screwed up so bad that there was no way out of that one.
That is true, yes. And we did build into this that you really got to get it perfect almost the whole time, because one little slip, you're not going to make that guest feel like they had an exceptional experience. And really, that's the only outcome that's acceptable to us, is the guest walks away feeling that they had a great experience and you took care of it. So why don't we try again with the next guest? Maybe we can do a little bit better.
Let's do it.
Look at the chicken that's in my meal. It has no skin and it's really small. Do you really expect me to eat this?
Okay, so now let's make sure we get this right. So I think that the correct answer is the one on the left, Neil.
Great. I ordered the 2-piece original meal with dark meat.
Good choice. He was smiling this time. We're doing a bit better. How do we think that we can fix this?
Oh, well, let's have a look. So here you are. Here's your chicken. Thanks for letting me know so I can make it right. Here's your chicken. Here's a free drink. Well, I'm going to go for the free drink. I think it'll make him happy. I'm not sure it'll make my manager happy, but let's give it a go.
Awesome. Thanks.
And that was the right answer. Your score went up, and we do actually teach them in the e-learning course that they need to provide something extra to make up for the inconvenience. So great job selecting that without knowing that knowledge.
Very good. And how to finish the conversation? See, this is interesting because already I'm not completely sure. I think both of those look okay to me. You're welcome. I'm happy to help you out today is good. Maybe you're welcome, but thank you for telling me so I can make this right is better. Let's try the one on the left.
I'm telling all my friends about this restaurant.
Good. So I think we got that one right in the end. So Neil, thanks so much for that. Let's jump back into the presentation because I want to keep us honest on time. We've got about 4 minutes left. But I think what that demonstrates is it's very engaging. It really makes you think. And what Rachel pointed out a few times was how close the wrong answer is to the right answer. But also how much feedback we get. So whether we make a correct or an incorrect answer, we see the reaction from the customer, which is obviously the most important thing, but then we also have these other prompts. We have lives we can lose, we have scores we can gain. So there are other incentives in there to keep us engaged and to keep us focused. So it really is a fantastic opportunity for people to prove that mastery, but in a completely safe environment. You can get that guy as angry as he likes, and it isn't going to affect KFC's brand because it's in the training room on the computer. And by the time the associate goes back onto the floor, you would hope that they'd learned enough that that wouldn't happen. So just in the interest of time, if we move forward, I think let's just recap on this idea of the route to funding, because we've come back to it 2 or 3 times throughout the last 30 minutes. You could see this as a journey. You could also see it as a checklist to some extent. When you're going to go and ask for the money, to do something like this, what do you need to have? Well, you need to have identified the opportunity for the business, not just the opportunity to make a great, fun training program. You need to have anticipated the barriers so that you can persuade people that it's going to work. You need to focus on performance so you can prove that everything you're designing and all the budget you want is going to go on outcomes and behaviors that are going to enhance the brand and increase the business performance. You need to think about making sure that you don't create a beautiful program and then see it fall over because it's too overwhelming for its audience. So it's thinking about how you're going to layer the learning so that people receive things with the right cadence and at the right time. And then you need to think about that mastery piece. We use gamification. We love gamification. There are other ways to do it. That's something that allows people to practice in a real or semi-real environment so that by the time they get back out onto the floor, they're really ready to go. And finally, you need to know what you're going to be measuring, and if possible, even start to demonstrate those metrics very early. So if you see this as a checklist, there's not necessarily a sequence to it, although there was in this case for us, but it's a very useful way that when you go into that budget meeting, you're very clear on the why for everything. And if there was one message from this webinar, it would be that. It would be focus on the why, not the what and the how. Those are important, but you'll find people care about that to a greater or lesser extent. The why is very important. Why are we doing this? Why e-learning? Why gamification? Why have an on-the-job activity at this stage in the curriculum? Why have 4 hours rather than 5 or 3? If you can articulate the why across all of those pieces, it starts to feel like the kind of business plan to which someone really feels compelled to say yes. And it was very successful. So Rachel, maybe you just want to talk us through some of the results that we had from the program.
Yeah, absolutely. Very quickly, we did start out with the end in mind, and so we knew we were going to do an evaluation after the fact. And the great news is that our evaluation came up with some really stellar results for us. So we compared completion of this training to our guest satisfaction scores. So I'm sure if you've been to a KFC, you've seen that survey at the bottom of your receipt. We have that for every restaurant. And so we were able to compare a before and after in guest satisfaction. And we did find that once this training program had been completed and seated, that we did see a decrease in customers that experienced a problem and an increase in friendliness, which was statistically significant for us. And on top of that, we've been really humbled to be able to receive quite a few awards for the program as well. And so that makes us feel good about that what we did is not only having business impact on our business, but it's being recognized.
Absolutely. So, you know, it really is one of those situations where everyone is a winner. For interactive services who worked on this program, you know, what more could we ask for than that we have a fantastic program and we can show real business results and we can win awards. It's absolutely amazing. For Rachel and for the KFC team who worked on this, obviously there are tangible benefits for those guys, and it translates. And if we look at the next slide, it translates into what happens next. And again, Rachel, maybe you could just give us an overview of this, but my key takeaway is when you have that kind of success in the business, what you do next becomes a much easier conversation when you need the resources and the budget and all the other things that go into making a successful program.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're looking at here is a high-level curriculum plan for our next group of audience members that we need to take to do. So our kind of frontline managers. We're at the point where that curriculum is now on the plate and or is on the table to do. And as Matt said, that conversation is so much easier now. When we started talking about service mastery, we knew we wanted to do gamification, but we didn't use those words in the beginning. We focused on all these things that we've been talking about today to really build the why. And then when we started talking about gamification as a tactic, everyone understood why we were doing it. Well, now I can start to, I'm talking about gamification up front in the beginning. We're looking at a curriculum that's completely simulation driven. There may be a few e-learning courses scattered in here, but that is not the focus. We're putting learners in a completely simulated environment and having them practice and fail and try again right away. And that conversation is incredibly easy right now. I'm having no pushback, and everyone understands the business case and why we're going for this, and we're all on the same page.
Wonderful. Dan, is there anything, before I close out the session, is there anything you'd like to add into that? Because I know you've been involved not only in the previous program, but in setting up the new program.
I'm sensitive to time, Matt, and I think you and Rachel have done a great job of rounding up any points I was going to make.
Okay, great. Well, it's only left to say thank you. Thanks for putting this time aside, for joining us today. We will reach out to everyone who joined the webinar today with a follow-up. But if there's anything that you heard today that you would like to know more about, please do get in touch. Thank you, Dan, for joining, and Rachel, particularly thank you to you for joining and allowing us to share with our network the success that you've had at KFC with this program.